Dobar dan svima. Evo nas na 25. konferenciji Centra za empirijska istraživanja religije. Naš današnji gost je otac Vladimir Szaniszlo iz Italije i ovo predavanje će da bude na engleskom jeziku, tako da ću ja još jednom da dam uvodnu reč na engleskom. Hello everyone, welcome to 25th Annual Conference of Center for Empirical Research of Religion from Novi SAD in Serbia. And we are very happy that we have a very interesting speaker with us. It's Inocent-Maria Vladimir Szaniszlo. He will have a topic, Invisible Migrants Workers and Visible Human Rights. Welcome, Father Vladimir, and please introduce yourself and start with this interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you also, dear Professor. I am Father Innocent Vladimir Szaniszlo from Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas Angelicum in Rome. I am original from Slovakia and with Hungarian roots, and I am professor for moral theology and also social ethics here, and at our institute of religious studies, called Mother Ecclesia. So, and our topic is my topic is about invisible migrants workers and visible human rights. It was a very interesting project in the project received from one foundation during the pandemic time. Project is called Crisis, Christian Responses in Solidarity to Crisis. And we worked especially about social solidarity in Europe, about labor migrants from Eastern Europe for Western Europe. And this project was approved by the university's scientific council with a lot of points, and until my leadership, and I worked together not only with our professors from different faculties, but also in cooperation with Institute Marie-Dominique Chenu in Berlin. The search for the new solidarity in Europe it was the central message of this project. By recognizing the plight of invisible migrant workers. Migrant workers are part of the everyday economic life of Europe. Today, we find Ukrainian agriculture workers in Spain, Romanian workers in Germany, and factories, and Slovakian, Czech, Polish, and Hungarian geriatric nurses assisting Austrian families, to have a few, for example. Usually their workers are invisible. Many of them are exploited both socially and economically. During their time of employment, they live in poverty level accommodations. Employee rights, such as hours or work breaks, have been ignored. During this very difficult time of pandemic time of COVID crisis, these invisible migrants workers have become visible. The lines of exploitation often run between Western and Eastern Europe, but also occur between the European Union and non-European Union states. In order to uphold the dignity of the human person with human condition for migrant workers, the civic organizations and churches can advocate in the following ways: to evaluate and critique legal or illegal existing conditions, to raise public awareness of the fate of migrant workers, and also to help with concrete proposals for improving the situation in the sense of a new solidarity, social solidarity in Europe. To this end, This research project examines concrete actions of European society's care of migrant workers in the life also of Catholic social thought. The goal of the project were to raise awareness of a system of hidden inequalities between Eastern and Western Europe, then to clarify the prophetic role of the church in advocacy for the invisible migrant workers, and to examine and apply the church social thoughts to this current concrete crisis in Europe, and finally to develop solutions for a new solidarity between Eastern and West, between East and West. Target participants, we had church leaders, communities and institutions, responsible persons in European institutions, and trade unions and employers. Description of research methodology was also very interesting. In the first step, the situation of invisible migrants workers in Europe is surveyed. This is not done in the sense of the quantitative survey. Instead, individual cases accessible to the public, internet news, literature, are presented as examples. In the second step, prophetic commitments of ecclesiastical institutions and persons are presented with a paradigmatic intention. In the third step, the relevant text of the social doctrine of the church are examined for relevance to the problem of invisible migrant workers. From there, a new practice of solidarity between Eastern and Western Europe is examined from a systematic theological perspective. In this fourth step of the investigation, the research will sketch socio-ethically viable solutions for a European coexistence between East and West that does not exploit the migrants' workers. Conference was very successful in May 21 with 17 participants from different countries and also with a very special guests, especially from the Vatican Undersecretary of the Migrants and the Refugee Section, for example, Reverend Vitillo, Secretary General from the International Catholic Commission for Migration from Geneva, Switzerland, and many others. We had also a very nice communique from the conference, signed by more than 500 persons on internet about social solidarity in Europe and in form of the petition. We also published after our conference a very nice book, what I gave also Professor Kamara when she were here at Gregoriana, because we worked together in this very nice conferences about migrants. The book is called also Invisible Migrants, Workers and Visible Human Rights. And now I try to explain a little bit this phenomenon, migration as a phenomenon, because this is really a very old, we can say also biblical, with the biblical roots phenomenon. The migration of individuals as well as nations is as old as humanity itself. Its root can also be found in the Bible, but it cannot be said that it is simple for its actors. Whether for religious reasons or other forms of persecution, or because of economic misery, or for the law enforcement reasons, this is a stable phenomenon in human history. Emigration, migrants' countries have often become a destination for migration through the history. For example, the case of Switzerland in 19th century, Venezuela, and many other countries. Destination countries benefit from workers without paying for their education and at no cost for their integration into society. Origins country receive remittances and investments made by those coming back, and migrants receive higher wages than in their home countries. Disadvantages coming from a large scale immigration and brain drain from sending countries should lead, and they really do, to advantages in the receiving countries. On the one hand, economic migration helps migrants and their families, and in some cases, even the entire national economy of migrants' countries of origin. On the other hand, it is the benefit of countries that require this form of movements of individuals and nations, even building the well-being of their society on it. A specific form of migration is that within the economic unit. Whether it is a migration within one's own state or a large economic entity, we can only say that it is often a necessary form of seeking a decent standard of living for individuals, families, and sometimes, especially in history of nations or religious communities. Migration is both a necessity, but also a trauma. The negative effects are significant for both families and migrants. What is exactly labor emigration? We consider labor emigration in the broad sense of this concept, which means people who cross national borders legally or illegally and remain outside their countries of birth or citizenship for a long period, generally for at least a year. We include these people who can resettle or stay abroad, taking a job, as well as students or other people staying there temporarily and being potentially employed in the host countries. Commuting is a special form of labor migration. Migrant stream, it is a favorable factor for cultural diversity. In a near perspective, it will lead to stronger competition and struggle for jobs between local people and foreigners. And it could also be a factor for intensifying the economic progress by means of opening new jobs both for foreigners and local people. Migrants have always been both essential to modern economies and object of suspicion. But the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, has brought this tension to a heat both in migrant sending and migrant receiving countries. And of course, the European Union membership plays here a very significant role. No other labor sending region is as connected to the labor receiving regions as Eastern Europe is to the Western Europe. Moving within the European Union is relatively cheap and frictionless, which will factor in as people plan their near future and decide whether it is worth staying and trying even for a while. Migration has been replaced today by mobility, which the European Union functioning more and more like the United States in that regard. This means that cities in the East are not longer victims, but also are active players in a battle for high-level talents as well as low-skilled labor. And many of them have such benefits as low cost of living, lower unemployment levels, and especially for their own nationals, as the COVID-19 pandemic illustrated, the allure of emotional support networks. Lives of the essential workers during the COVID pandemic was really very difficult. the true notion of essential workers that crystallized in the time of the pandemic is sufficiently problematic. In the context of healthcare measures, when the only guaranteed protection is social distancing, essential workers are the ones whose labor not only sustain the vitality of economies, but also puts their own lives at risk. Given that the decision of what constitutes essential occupations, so-called, is taken by capital and that most of this work is low wage, it is hard to dismiss the realization that essential labor means disponible lives. In the current pandemic, Eastern European migrants' labor remains caught between being a dangerous vector of contagious and disposable life, between punitive measures and exploitation. We have also, of course, some examples from this time. Ensuring access to healthcare, for example, is always important, but is absolutely vital amid a pandemic. While this was only one publicly known instance of a seasonal worker having COVID-19 during the first period wave, the case has received a lot of attention and raised questions about how stringently health considerations the future in the European race for seasonal workers. And there was also a lot of scandals in this time. For example, in June 2020, Europe's biggest slaughterhouse and meatpacking plant, Tönnies, located in Reda Wiedenbrück, North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, became the largest European epicenter of coronavirus spread. When hundreds of cases were confirmed, company officials rushed to blame migrants who make up the vast majority of employers at the plant. Union officials replied that Tönnies was trying to cover up and outbreak that catastrophic exploitative and unsanitary working and living conditions. Claimed communal housing, no protective equipments, no social distancing, etc., has caused. After over 1,550 workers tested positive, Germany imposed new lockdown measures in the region. 7,000 Romanian, Bulgarian, and Polish employees and their families were forced into quarantine in the crowded company-provided dormitories. A tough fence built around the slaughterhouse prevented workers from escaping, while police and other security officials were deployed to enforce the lockdown. These measures increased contagious risks, making it impossible for workers to social distance, buy protection equipment, and access medical care. These workers are often recruited by temporary employment agencies, which act as broker between clients and workers. In principle, the relationship between agencies, clients, and workers should facilitate demand, supply, matching, and benefit all parties involved. In reality, power relationships are often skewed and shed more risks onto workers. This type of employment relationship raises justifiable concerns about who is accountable when workers' rights are breached, especially in situations where the workers are self-employed or on so-called zero-hours contracts, which do not stipulate a minimum number of working hours, which in reality force contractors to be on call routinely while paid only for hours actually worked. We need to know that of the nearly 10 million economically active in European Union 28 free movers in 2020, near 1 million workers in the health and social care section worked. European Union free movers have been essential in filling the gaps in demand for this sector across Europe even in this time before the pandemic, not only during this period. In Austria, for example, more than 100,000 people work in residential care centers and private homes. Many European citizens from the Central Eastern Europe, in particular from Romania, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, are there. Care workers are being recruited from Romania and Bulgaria for temporary care provided to those infected with COVID-19. Care workers commuting from neighborhoods in Slovakia, Czechia, Hungary, and Slovenia also reported continuing to work amid the pandemic. And of course, there are a lot of vulnerability of low-skilled workers, not only in this time of pandemic, but I suppose also today. These low-skilled workers are much more vulnerable to abuse than labor migrants with high-level skills and unique competencies. In addition to the vulnerability attached to low-skilled labor, many low-skilled migrants are also vulnerable to abuse because they are protection-seeking labor migrants. Protection-seeking labor migrants are afraid to return to the persecution or a lack of safety from which they have fled, and their fear of returning to their countries of origin further increases their vulnerability. The pandemic has proven the extreme interconnected nature of the world, which leaves us all vulnerable to break down at a global scale. Attempts to introduce strict controls to counter abuse have led to more bureaucracy, longer waiting times, competencies deportation, and less predictability for both employers and labor migrants. A system that promised to be safe for labor migrants has in fact left them to fend for themselves, exposed to abusive employers. And a system that promises to protect domestic labor standards has turned out to be just as vulnerable to abuse as are the labor migrants themselves. The need for European countries to enhance their possibilities to compete for highly skilled labor, global talents, is as pressing as ever. The COVID crisis has highlighted the fact that Europe is greatly dependent on low-skilled labor migration as well. The pandemic has proved the extreme interconnected nature of the world, which leaves all vulnerable to break down at a global scale. But it leaves some more vulnerable than others. As evidenced in the past, in times of economic crisis and recession, the social and economic inequalities are likely to rise. The risks associated with seasonal and care work have gained visibility because of the pandemic, but they have always been there. Reinforcing regulations and mechanisms to limit these risks for workers is likely to increase the attractiveness and effectiveness of European Union labor mobility in the future. It is also the prerequisite for a level playing field where the benefits of maintaining a large, flexible, and experienced workforce can counterbalance the perverse effects on individuals and their rights. Action to ensure that workers' rights are protected are important in the short and longer term, as the current reality underscores that precarious workers are key building blocks of the European Union economies rather than accessories. Historian Frank Snowden remarked that pandemics present a mirror in which humanity can see its face. Will Europe cooperate to care for its essential workers, or will they become a problem that Eastern Europe will have to comfort alone? That was a very, or the really main question this time. Balancing pandemic containment and economic reopening had defined the two dimensions of public policy response to COVID-19 in Central and Eastern Europe. On the one hand, governments in the region have cooperated with Western European counterparts to allow essential workers to return to Western and Southern European countries whose food security and economic reopening depend on migrant labor. On the other hand, Eastern European countries have been left to their own devices when it comes to treating returning migrants, limiting contagious from migrants to non-migrants, and more generally, bearing the public health costs of Europe's economic reopening. The coronavirus outbreak exposes our profound economic dependence on migration, even in times of lockdown and border closure. It shows how deeply European prosperity has come to rely on freedom of movement and essential workers from Central and Eastern Europe. Hopefully, it will not also reveal what disasters can result from governments' failures to cooperate. And very important was support of the European Commission in this time, especially Nicholas Schmid, European Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. He said that these workers are essential workers because in this crisis, if we hadn't had them, we would have a food crisis. You cannot have a business model which is based on some form of exploitation of foreign workers. And we also shown at this time some examples of prophetic courage for the defense of migrants from ecclesiastical institutions and personality presented with paradigmatic intent. At the first place, I mentioned Reverend Peter Kossen from Lengerich in Germany. I met him also by the very nice conference in Munich some years after. This spiritual father, which a story from Vechta, spoke very radically about the phenomenon of the treatment of mobile migrants during the COVID-19 pandemic in words such as slavery, inhuman behavior. His native brother, a doctor, a physician, treated many such workers at this difficult time and testified to unusual injuries and unwillingness to treat migrants. Reverend Kossen founded also institution, association, the Action for Dignity and Justice to help migrants assert their rights. Then I mentioned also another Bishop Milan Lah from Slovakia. He was in this time a bishop of the eparchy of Parma, Greek Catholic eparchy of Parma in the United States. Now he back in the Slovakia. In Slovakia, during the reign of the post-communists 5 years ago, the young Bishop Lah take a support for the protesting nurses, and he points out the poverty of the Slovak healthcare system. The third one was the auxiliary bishop Ansgar Paf from Cologne in Germany, because he spoke also very clearly about the exploiting of the migrants in this time. Exploitation and slavery-like practices are believed by some to be phenomena of distant lands and times long past. But migrants from Eastern Europe are abused as cheap labor in the middle of Germany today and are hosted in the inhuman dwelling. The exploitative employment relationship in the meat industry are a scandal, he said in this time. And the last one is Monsignor Jean-Luc Brunan, Bishop of Havre, France. And he asks, the church and migrants a common future? We can remove the question mark because the church offers a surface of expression and meeting to people and groups of various origins to weave a history promised with a future. What guarantees the future is the promise of God fulfilled in Jesus, namely the bringing together of all humanity in a common experience of salvation. And it has also social relevance. What is demanded of the pastoral care of migrants is to bring to life in an entire church the concern, openness, and welcome to guarantee the conditions for the spiritual experience of otherness. Former Secretary of the Commission Justice and Peace, Father Christian Mellon from France, show us that the interestings of Catholic authorities in migration is not a new phenomenon. As early as the 19th century, priests and monks who spoke their language also moved with the migrants together. For example, Italian Bishop Scalabrini between 1887 and 95, who founded two congregations for this purpose, also inspired Holy See, which founded the Office for the Spiritual Care of Migrants in 1905. We have also some American bishops, for example, Auxiliary Bishop Mario Eduardo Dorsonville Rodriguez, chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Migration. And he speaks about the same problems that we have in Europe are happening in the United States. It was the pandemic that hit migrant workers and refugees the hardest because of the conditions in which these essential workers find themselves. We need finally to seek solutions for this very difficult migration mobility. Proposed solution from the migrants' mobile health workforce in the European Union member states as an essential contribution to universal healthcare coverage. Migrant carers reduce shortages and mitigate health labor market failures, especially in high-income European Union countries. A transsectoral governance approach is needed to analyze the role of migrant carers and to understand its political dimensions. COVID-19 has revealed health policy and labor market weaknesses which create new individual and population health risks. Action has to be taken to develop this transsectoral European Union governance based on solidarity. Public health must improve advocacy for the LTC migrant care workforce. First steps by European Union to improve the situation of seasonal workers made. In June 20, the European Parliament acknowledged the challenges faced by seasonal and cross-border workers when it passed a resolution calling for urgent action to safeguard their health and safety. It stated that the pandemic had exposed and exacerbated social dumping and existing precariousness for many of them. Also, MEPs called on the Commission to tackle abusive subcontracting practices and to ensure that the European Labour Authority, ELA, becomes fully operational as a matter of priority. They also urged member states to strengthen labour inspections and ensure quality housing that's decoupled from workers' wage. Conclusion of this organization's workshop, for example, I mentioned here. First recommendation was that the European Commission should take the lead in setting up a transnational advisory service network for migrant workers funded by the European Union, with the involvement of the social partners and migration organizations. It should be a legal obligation for European Union member states to provide information for migrants in all European Union languages to a dedicated central website and phone application. The second recommendation there, the European Union member states and governments should designate one lead authority in each country to coordinate multi-level effort and information services for temporary migrants. Countries of origin would have the responsibility to inform about legal possibility to migrate for work. Destination common countries have the responsibility to request employers for information on migrants workers so that they and the centers can be connected to provide services to register complaints and to help migrants workers find remedies. And also important that the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan was made for especially all the migrants in 2022 in European Union. And I have some final considerations here about all this topic. Open borders without proper social protection serve first and foremost the interests of employers. The COVID-19 pandemic has created the strongest ever global stress test for the health workforce governance and has demonstrated the migrants' care arrangements can easily collapse. These challenges can neither be solved nationally nor merely on the level of health labor market policy. Moreover, there is a need to balance different interests of individual carers, including free mobility, and the interests of sending and receiving countries. This calls for integrated trans-sectoral and transnational governance approaches in Europe. It is very important to emphasize the OECD's view that make sure that the contributions of migrants are not forgotten but rewarded. And finally, from the Christian point of view, we can say that for the man of the Bible, the duty to welcome the foreigners is not an abstract commandment, but it's part of an experience that of having been oneself a foreigner. You shall treat the alien who resides, which you know differently than the natives born among you. Have the same love for him as for yourself, for you too were once aliens in the land of Egypt. Because of the identification of Jesus with the foreigners welcomed, the Christian's attitude towards foreigners will never be a purely ethical and political question. It is a theological question, as John Paul II underlined in his message in 1998. For Christians, welcoming and solidarity with strangers do not only constitute a human duty of hospitality, but a precise requirement which flows from fidelity even to the teaching of Christ. So, however, despite the laws and the necessary controls, the aforementioned change of mindset, which begins with a personal approach, is needed. I do not like to talk about the communist past that I lived in my home country, but also the communists themselves, although often only formally valued cross-border cooperation, družba. Foreigners workers were greeted with flowers and souvenirs and placed in front of the TV cameras and the footage of the photojournalists needed to their propaganda. However, the very idea of respect and reverence, not only for the individual, but for the whole national community, which is several thousand workers comes to the host country to help both the host and the economy itself, deserves attention. We work very little in this European Union, which despite so-called corona nationalism, is still the best peaceful solution for human progress, to get to know and respect each other. This is not a tempting topic in the media either. Nevertheless, I am glad that we managed to relaunch this also your conference in Novi Sad. It is the church and national cultural organization that can do decisive work in this field. Thank you very much for your invitation.
Ďakujem. Thank you a lot for this really inspiring presentation. I had that chance to meet you in Rome, in Vatican, when we had really great conversation about education of migrants. And when I saw your book about migrants as invisible workers, all the time I was thinking where we can include that topic. And then Professor Zorica choose this year that topic will be marginalization in religion, science, theology, philosophy. So that was a really great chance to hear you and to have you as a guest. Thank you for all those really interesting examples. And I was thinking now after pandemic, do you still have some concerns about the main human rights of migrant workers? And what role do you see for the church, especially Catholic Church, in empowering migrant workers to become not only recipients of aid, but to be active agents of justice and change? We spoke about a lot during the conference about Paulo Freire approach and about justice and social welfare. And I think that a lot of these can be contributed and related to your presentation too. Yes. So maybe just to add a few sentences about it before we close.
As you know, this topic is a never-ending story. It's true, and especially in time of crisis, economical crisis, that will be a lot of abuse of migrant workers. But we cannot see more that what's happened really during the pandemic, that these invisible migrants become visible. That is today not more so possible. We need, and we have a very strong voice in new Pope Leo 14 or 2, because he is very engaged for the social justice. He speaks a lot also today by the audition this morning about social justice. But we need to have also in the society some feelings about that this is important to make a control and to understand that these people bring our well-being in our countries, that they are responsible for our art of living also.
Thank you a lot. We hope that you will write a work and that we can publish together with all other presentations in our book of proceedings that we are planning to publish till the end of this year. Thank you so much, and we are sending best wishes and greetings to you and your team in Rome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. We wish also a very good and fruitful work to your university in Novi Sad.
Thank you. I hope that on the next conference you will have a chance to come to be present face to face here.
It will be very nice. Yes, thank you very much.
Or we will come to Rome again.
It's also possible.
Yeah. Professor Zorica, would you like to add something?
Thank you, Vladimir, very much. We enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you too. And have a nice work and have a nice project in this case.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. All the best, I think.
All the best.
Thank you.